Do Christians need to keep the Old Testament festival days that we find in the Bible? Let's look at some examples. In 1 Corinthians 5, 7 through 9, the Apostle Paul is talking about the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. He literally says, let us keep the feast. These are Old Testament holy days. Yet here we have the Apostle Paul, whom many claim said the law was done away with, celebrating these. Doesn't make any sense if it was done away with. Why would he be encouraging people to let us keep the feast? And this is in Corinth, right? So some people say, oh, he's only speaking to Jews. In Corinth is a Gentile nation, yet he's telling them, let us keep the feast. He's specifically talking about Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which you can find in the Old Testament in the books of Exodus and Leviticus. Look it up, Passover, Feast of Unleavened Bread. In addition to that, in Acts 17, 2 through 3, we read about how Paul's manner or custom was to worship on the Sabbath, not Sunday, the Sabbath. Paul told believers to imitate him as he tongue twister, to mimic him as he mimicked Messiah, right? So here we have Paul himself saying his custom was to worship on the Sabbath. So if New Testament Christians want to mimic Paul, then they should be keeping the Sabbath, just like he did in Acts 2 through 3. Now, some will argue and say, well, that was only for the Jews. But if you read, it talks about how he convinced Jews and Greeks about the resurrection of Messiah. So again, Old Testament worship still in the New Testament. Doesn't make any sense if it's all thrown away or done away with, right? A big one is the Feast of Pentecost. Many churches even call themselves Pentecostals. The Greek word for Pentecost means 50th, or count to 50th, okay? Pentecost is one and the same as the Hebrew Old Testament holy day, Shavuot, or Feast of Weeks, which you can find in the book of Leviticus. So in Acts 2:1, when they were all gathered on the day of Pentecost, it wasn't just some random thing that they gathered. They were gathering in worship of an Old Testament holy day. Look it up. Pentecost in the Greek is Shavuot, or Feast of Weeks, in the Old Testament. Here's what I want you to think about, and genuinely think about this. Why do the modern day Christian churches tell us all those Old Testament days are not needed? They're done away with. They're useless. They don't mean anything. They twist verses to say they're done away. Yet these same churches will implement paganism into their church. Pagan worship such as Christmas, Easter, crucifix worship, the worship of saints, whatever you want to call it. So you can't worship the biblical days because that's wrong, that's evil, that's bad. But yet the church incorporates heathenistic worship, which the Bible never ordains, nor does it sanctify. Do your homework and prove it to yourself.